Every marriage goes through seasons where you just don't feel that strongly about that other person. It's a very normal thing. But the couple that chooses to build their house on the solid foundation of Jesus, when those storms hit, their marriage will not fall. Saying yes on your wedding day, I mean, it's easy stuff. But saying yes for the rest of your life, it's a different story. That's hard. And this is where many of you are right now. It's a struggle and it's hard. So the question is, how can we grow and flourish in our marriage through mutual submission in the way that God has designed it to be? And so with the rest of my time, here's what I want to do. I want to give you 2 commitments that I hope that you will say yes to. And because, as we said, saying yes for the rest of your life, it's hard, and so this is hard, but let me tell you something, it is so worth it. And what these 2 things are, these are actually foundational type things. I mean, you focus on these things right here, the other stuff becomes a lot easier. Now, for many of us, we focus on the other stuff and we don't focus on the foundational part. And so we did it in reverse, but I'm going to challenge you. I want you to focus on these 2 things. Now, if you're not married and you hope to be, listen, do not settle for anyone who is not already committed to these 2 things. And if you're not going to be married again, you just chose for what you go, I don't want to get married again. Listen, you're going to hear some things in what I talk about that you can use in any relationship. So 2 things that we want to go through. Here's the first one. I hope you'll say yes and commit to a Jesus-centered marriage. Jesus, at the end of his longest message, is known in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is comparing people that build their house on different foundations. And here's what he says. To wrap it up, he says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house. And so when you see house, you just think of life, who built his life on the rock. And rock equals solid, unmovable. And so he's saying, those who build their life on the life and teachings of Jesus, they're on good ground. They're unmovable. And then he says, the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. Now I want you to notice, Jesus is not saying if the storms come. He is saying when they come. You see, you're going to go through storms in your marriage, and those storms are going to be really, really hard. And they're going to impact your marriage. And some of those storms may last seasons of your life. And if you're a parent, you know this. Parenting is challenging. And if one of your kids has a health or behavior issue, that just adds additional stress on your marriage. One of our kids has a mental disorder called reactive attachment disorder. And the short of that is that they are not able to connect with other people, including us. And not only is she not able to connect, but she just destroys any relationship when it gets to a certain point. And she really takes it out on the caregivers, and so it's a constant internal fight with Donna and me, and so we don't have many easy weeks. It's a struggle. It's been hard on our marriage, and it continues to be hard on our marriage. And we talk to other couples that have similar situations, reactive attachment disorder kids, and they'll just talk about the same thing, just the pounding it is on their marriage. But there are storms that your relationship is going to experience. Some of those storms are just the loss of parents, or the loss of finances, the loss of jobs, the loss of health. Or for many of us, we don't realize the storm of transitioning from one stage of life to another. Or here's a real common one. Every marriage goes through seasons where you just don't feel that strongly about that other person. It's a very normal thing. But the couple that chooses to build their house on the solid foundation of Jesus, when those storms hit, their marriage will not fall. Brad Wilcox is a leading sociologist at the University of Virginia. Studies tons of couples. And he did a study recently, and it found that couples that go to a Bible-believing church, and so not just any church, but a church that believes and teaches the Bible, that couple has a 35% less chance of getting a divorce than ones that don't. There was also another study recently done by the National Association for Marriage Enrichment. And it found that couples that pray together on a regular basis, read their Bible together on a daily basis, the divorce rate for those couples is less than, check this out, 1%. Think about this. National average of 50%, down to 1 or less than 1%. And so if you're a couple that's struggling, or maybe not struggling, okay, if you're not, and you want to build a stronger foundation, and please, I'm not saying this as a pastor, even though I am a pastor. Research shows, commit to being in church together, read the Bible together, begin to pray for your marriage. Watch what God does. And it makes sense because if he designed it, it makes sense to get him involved in it. Now, I think there's another reason why those stats are the way they are. And I want to show you this by showing you a picture. And I used to think this picture was kind of cheesy, but now that I'm married and I just seen the truth of it, now I don't think it's cheesy anymore. Maybe you've seen this picture before. Here it is right here. It's this picture of this triangle with God on the top, and then you have the husband and the wife on separate sides of each other. Now, as you look at that picture, what happens as each of them begins to draw closer to God? What ends up happening? Well, I'll show you in the next picture. Here it is right here. What ends up happening? What is their position with each other? Closer. You see, as they draw closer to God, that gap between them gets shorter, and they get closer to each other. And so I know it's kind of a simple drawing, but I think it's a really, really profound illustration. That as we get closer to God, that your intimacy with your spouse will actually get deeper. Now, I know there's some couples that don't follow Jesus, and they would say, we're happy. And you know what? I wouldn't argue with that. But I would say this: are you as happy as you could be emotionally, physically, and spiritually? And you know what I would argue? That they're not. But I also know Jesus-following couples that would say the very same thing. Second thing that I hope you'll say yes to, I want you to commit to this. Commit to a covenant-keeping marriage. Now, for most of us, the reality is that when it comes to our marriage, it's more of a contractual keeping marriage. Because for most of us, we still believe the lie that marriage is there to make us happy. Now, this is going on in your marriage when you have this constant back and forth of let's make a deal going on. All right, it's kind of like this. Hey, if you do this, then I'll do this. Hey, if you stop yelling, then I'll start listening. Hey, if you go to counseling, then I'll start taking medication. Hey, listen, if you're nice, then I'll reward you later, if you know what I mean. If you do this, then this. But here's the problem with a contractual relationship. You see, I'm only there as long as you keep your end of the deal. Or, I don't like the terms of this deal. I'm going to change the terms because you know what? I want a brand new deal. Now, let me go back and read these words from the book of Genesis that I read earlier, because you're going to see in these words that God's design all along was us to be in a covenant relationship with another person. Here's what the writer of Genesis says. He says this: "For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh." And that word that's used for united means soldered or cemented together. Cemented physically, emotionally, and spiritually. In other words, we're connected to that other person. We're connected to our spouse through a covenant relationship. Not let's make a deal, not as long as you make me happy, not let's try this out. A covenant relationship. And a covenant is nothing more than a lasting, binding obligation to another person. Or as I like to say it this way, I'm not going anywhere. Now let me just speak to married couples for a minute. Now if you're here and you've gone through a divorce, and some of you have, and some of you didn't want that to happen, and you did whatever you could to save it, but you can't control another person's decisions. Listen, we love you, we're glad that you're here, and we want to encourage you to, if you've never gone through divorce care, I want to encourage you to go through divorce care, to let God just heal your heart from that experience. And you can go to the Next Steps room, Next Steps area for you to do that. Now, for some of you, you're in an abusive relationship and it's physically abusive. You just need to get out of that thing and seek safety right away. And some of you are in an abusive relationship, but it's not physical, it's other ways. You just need to know this, that sometimes the most loving thing to do is to set up the proper boundaries, and those proper boundaries include you being separate from that person for a period of time. But if you're married and you are struggling and you're struggling in your marriage, here's what I want to encourage you to do. I want to encourage you to be willing to say yes and to continue to say yes to that promise in sickness and in health. And I want you to say, you know what, I'm not going anywhere because we're in this together. And sure, things are hard, and sure, things are difficult, and we're really struggling with this, but you know what? You are worth fighting for, and we're going to do this together. Let me tell you something. You do that, you will experience a richness and a history with someone that you can't experience anywhere else. Melanie Shamal, in her book, The Antelope in the Living Room, she actually writes about the story of how her and her husband Perry met. And then they got married, and then they were married for about 5 years, and they decided that they were going to start having a family. And then I want you to just listen to her story in her own words. And as I read this story, for some of you, this is your story. A big part of this was Donna and me's story. But I want you to listen to her story. She writes this: "We were in our early 30s, and it seemed like the right time to start a family. At least that's what our parents kept telling us. I got pregnant, and then I had a miscarriage. Perry and I were heartbroken, but I think these things affect women differently. While we both experienced a loss, it was something that happened inside my body between the hormones and the sadness. Something shifted in me. Depression settled in, and I spent a lot of time wondering how soon I could go back to bed." She then writes, "I can almost draw a line between before miscarriage and after miscarriage. We had had financial struggles and other problems in our first 5 years of marriage, but this was the first thing that we couldn't decide just to buck up and be positive. About the morning of my D&C, Perry drove me to the hospital and was right there holding my hand before I went in. He was there when I woke up, and because he knows my love language, on the way home he drove me through Shipley's to get a chocolate donut. She says maybe it was the anesthesia, but I kept reaching for his hand and saying, 'I really love you.' But I was speaking the absolute truth. I had never loved him more because up till that point, I didn't realize that I'd ever been so aware of how much he loved me. It was the moment that I realized that he didn't just love me when I was fun or pretty or cooking spaghetti and meatballs. He loved me when I was hurting and depressed and wearing the same pajamas 4 days in a row. It sounds weird to say after 5 years of marriage, but it was the first time I realized that he was going to stick with me, for better or for worse." I read that story, and I want that from Donna. She wants that from me. And you know, I just think every single person wants that. Every single person wants to be loved, and they want to know that they are loved no matter what. That even when we're not at our best, even when we're at our worst, I love you no matter what. That's a covenant. And that's God's design for our marriage. That even when the feelings aren't there, and even when we're not making each other happy, and even when we think we're not getting our needs met, and even when everything in me wants to leave this thing, I'm not going anywhere because I love you. What if you were to commit to that today? I'm telling you, if you would be willing to say yes to that, here's what you're going to discover. Saying yes on your wedding day is easy, but saying yes for the rest of your life, man, is it hard. And the struggle is real in the midst of that hard, but it is more than worth it.